Welcome to Informed Choices with Dilshad, and today we are speaking with Naila Amaru, advocacy and policy strategist. Naila Amaru is an Army veteran with over a decade of experience in public policy and administration. She began her career in community development, and since then, she has traversed the political landscape from City Hall to Capitol Hill and has served as a public interest lobbyist, a campaign administrator, at local, state, and congressional levels, a policy advisor, a legislative aide to U.S. Congressman John Lewis, and an executive director of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus of the New York City Council. Naila experiences in nearly every aspect of the advocacy process, and it has made her an expert in the craft of translating ideas into public policy. Working closely with community-based organizations has deepened her understanding of how grassroots organization can effectively identify and support policy initiatives. In addition, her experiences at every level of government has provided her with the keen insight needed to create change. Welcome, Naila.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Likewise. I think your journey has been very challenging, but also rewarding in the area of advocacy and policy matter. Can you tell us briefly your experiences, like what were the change-making points that you did when you were with the New York City Council working for Asian, Latino, and African American under one umbrella?
Primarily, my first step was to develop and execute an outreach strategy for each individual member of the caucus, because each member of the caucus represented a different constituency, whether it was in the Bronx or in Staten Island or in Brooklyn or in Manhattan or in Queens, or whether their constituency was primarily Black, Latino, or Asian. And through those conversations, I was able to, number one, balance different priorities and different interests across the communities, across the different council members, and to deliver a unified agenda. And through that unified agenda, we focused on affordable housing, we focused on education, we focused on jobs and employment, we focused on working on the police and community relations within our communities across all 5 boroughs, and also minority and women-owned businesses. And so we focused on issues throughout all 5 boroughs, across all 26 different councilmatic districts. And so that was primarily my focus when I came on board, was how do we build a cohesive caucus with different priorities, but find a shared common ground that we can work from and develop a legislative blueprint.
Awesome. So this was completely that you were looking into a lot of collaborative efforts and how you can bring different institutions as well as representations from different demographics of women.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Now let's hear, Naila, that what role do women of color need to play in order to make the present movement stir concrete action at the desired pace and relevant policy matter?
So there are primarily 2 ways to impact public policy. There is the external channel, which are your grassroots organizations, and there's the internal, which is government itself. And within these 2 primary channels of grassroots spaces and government spaces, there is a lot of space and many different roles that we can work from. Work for a nonprofit that focuses on an issue that you're passionate about. You can lead a nonprofit, you can sit on the board of a nonprofit, you can organize a community-based organization that focuses on neighborhood-based issues, or as a private citizen, you have the power of the ballot. You can choose to cast your vote and elect good people into public office that will make those decisions on your behalf, or if you're not pleased with your elected officials' performance, you have the power to vote them out of office. On the internal channel, working through government, you can work for a city agency or a state agency or a federal agency that focuses, again, on an issue that you're most passionate about, that you're concerned about. Or you can work for an elected official that focuses on a lot of different issues but is much more neighborhood based. Or, my favorite, you can run for a public office yourself.
So Naila, one of the very important things that needs attention is inclusivity, as you know. And how do you define women of color? Because oftentimes when there is an event, we see our African American sisters only. So what needs to be done in order to make this term more inclusive? And I know slowly and surely it's changing, but what are your thoughts on it, that how can we make and work together?
So the definition of women of color is, at its most basic, women who are not white. And it's really important to understand that the term women of color has political roots in history. So the term women of color was actually created in the 1970s. There was a group of African American women who were attending the National Women's Conference in 1977, and they had crafted the Black Women's Agenda. And when other minority women heard about it, they wanted to be included. And it was through a process of negotiation that the term women of color was decided upon. And so the political history and the root of women of color was to bring in other women who were not necessarily African American or operated from the black-white binary, but also shared a similar history and similar experiences and similar challenges. Through the political and social lens. With that said, in terms of making the term women of color more inclusive, I think that there are two things that we can do. Number one is rethink how we use the term women of color. Women of color primarily means Black women, Latino women, or Asian women, but really thinking through internally as women of color, having conversations and reaching out to other women who don't necessarily fall into that mainstream understanding of what women of color means and who that includes. The second thing I would say in terms of working towards making the term more inclusive is to stop the practice of what's referred to as othering. We need to stop the focus on race and focus more on the issues and the challenges that all of us experience as women of color through a political and through a social lens to be more inclusive.
That is awesome, because I think these are some of the key points that you have brought to the attention. And one of the things that you are doing, and I think a lot of our women who are feminist activists are doing to bring this inclusivity, is to do a lot of outreach programs in this capacity, so they can bring other women who share similar agenda, as you just mentioned. So Naila, young women of color are challenged these days, as we all know. And how do they kind of, to my understanding, how can they reframe the concept of political power and figure out how their civic engagement can influence government decisions? And in this context, what is your advice to these young women?
So the first thing that I would suggest to any woman, and especially women of color, who want to occupy a space where they can effect meaningful social change, is to explore your own understanding of what political power means to you. It means different things to different people in different spaces.
Absolutely.
Does political power mean to you being a grassroots organizer and building coalitions with your neighbors to focus on an issue that's important to all of you? Does political power mean being part of a nonprofit advocacy group and working through more institutionalized and formalized channels to bring about the change that's important to you? Or does political power mean to you running for office, or something in between? The spectrum of political power runs deep, it runs far, and it runs wide. I think it's most important that we understand what it means to us personally. For me, my understanding of political power is the people united will never be defeated.
Absolutely.
And so my belief in the power of the grassroots informs every decision I make, and it frames and shapes how I move in these spaces, in the nonprofit and government spaces. The second thing that I would say is, once you understand what your understanding of political power means, exercise it. And so again, understanding what political power means to you and finding a way that you can exercise it in a way that you feel connected to the work. And the last thing that I would say to young women of color who are interested in being part of a process in terms of policy and politics and advocacy is claim your space. Know that you are capable.
Right.
Believe in yourself, trust your expertise, and know that you belong. There have been so many times when, as I, throughout my own political journey, starting off as a grassroots organizer to working on Capitol Hill, where I have had to deal with the questioning of, why are you here at the table? And it has been a process in which I have had to come to a point in my own being, in my own confidence, to claim my space and to know that I belong there. And so I would just, again, share with every young woman, especially women of color, claim your space and become part of a process where you can build communities and change lives.
That's really, really very, I think, very important and significant to know, especially for our young girls and women who are marching, who have started this journey professionally. So I would just say, like, there are 3 steps that you have just listed, and one of them is to identify your power through your talents and passion and whatever area that you choose to work through. And the second one is exercise your power. And the third one is to claim your space.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Naila, for being part of Informed Choices.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, looking ahead to future challenges, women in leadership roles, and seeking certain levels of attainment will need to stay grounded in their own definitions of success and quality of life, just like Naila just mentioned. We need to answer the question about the structures that are embedded in our lives. The problem is that women of color are expected to be the diversity, yet they are excluded because there is no change within infrastructures. Context does matter, and so does identity. There is no doubt that women of color, like other marginalized groups, are confronted with roadblocks in the workplace. But there are differences among the obstacles that they face. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Our task is to understand and appreciate that complexity, and for that, an open mind with no implied bias is the first step towards a thriving culture and a progressive economy. Thank you for joining Informed Choices with Dilshad. We hope together we can craft better perceptions.